In the years after the Second World War, there was a solitary former member of Hitler's government who remained inside of Spandau Prison in his old age. Rudolf Hess has to many historians over the decades been seen as a strange enigma, and a man whose downfall was puzzling and bizarre. Hess is remembered for being the Deputy Fuhrer and close friend of the dictator of Nazi Germany, and he was as loyal as a dog to Hitler. But he attempted to broker peace with the British, making a crazy flight which saw him crash land in Scotland, without somehow being shot down. Hess's death inside of Spandau Prison has attracted a lot of attention over the years, as he was 93 at the time of this, and there have been many questions raised around this. But in the years following his death, Spandau Prison was demolished and his remains were exhumed and were even dug up, as there was a huge amount of concern about the activity that was taking place around the grave of Rudolf Hess. Join us today as we look at digging up the Deputy Fuhrer, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to click subscribe down below. The Deputy Fuhrer of the Nazi Party was Rudolf Hess, and he was a man who was blindly loyal and devoted to Hitler ever since the first day he saw him speak in 1920. Hess was member number 16 of the Nazi Party, and to begin with he helped fundraising efforts for the party, and was even injured as he tried to shield Hitler from an explosion which occurred at the Hofbrau house. But Hess would be willing to lay his life down for Hitler, and he was involved in the Munich Putsch, and during this he had taken a number of hostages, and he took them away from Munich, but his carelessness cost him, as he went to make a telephone call, and his hostages then escaped. Hess was imprisoned for 18 months for his involvement in the failed revolution, and it was he who edited and helped to write Hitler's book Mein Kampf. But he was a skilled pilot who had shown great skill behind an aircraft, and this would later become handy for him. For his loyalty he was made Deputy Fuhrer, which was in a sense a ceremonial title, meaning he would step in if something happened to Hitler, but chances are that there would have been a huge power play by many members of the Nazi Party if Hitler would have met his demise early, and that Hess would have been ousted by one of the more forceful characters, such as Martin Bormann or Hermann Goring. Hess was also a Reichsleiter, and was involved in the planning of the Nuremberg rallies each year, and he gave the opening speech, and would be the one who would introduce Hitler to the huge crowds. But despite these ceremonial roles, Hess's office was involved in the creation and drafting of the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws that imposed strict restrictions on Jewish people within Germany. This is often seen as the earliest steps that eventually led to the final solution and the Holocaust, but Hess was a man who was motivated not by power, but by blind loyalty and devotion to Hitler and the Nazi Party. He would have done absolutely anything for his friend. However, as the Second World War raged on, Hess continued to demonstrate anti-Semitic beliefs and language, and he believed the conflict was begun by certain groups of people, and he gave speeches with these undertones. Hess as a man was more than just a loyal servant. He was slightly bizarre in his beliefs. He was a severe hypochondriac who believed he may have had severe health problems, and he brought his own meals when he met with Hitler, which upset the dictator. But Hess was also very paranoid, and he had a fondness of the occult, but as the war continued, he believed he was being usurped in the affections of Hitler because of the war efforts, and important ministers and members of cabinet, such as Wilhelm Keitel, were taking precedent over him. He was also concerned that a war on two fronts would ruin Germany, and because of this he tried to end one of the fronts, and to negotiate to end the hostilities with the British. He took a Messerschmitt Bf-110 that had been modified on a remarkable flight where he managed to get within 20 miles of his intended destination. Hess had dreamed up a scenario where he was a martyr and a peacekeeper, and he planned to meet with the Duke of Hamilton, and the two could then agree peace on behalf of Britain and Nazi Germany. But Hess was captured by the Home Guard following his landing in Scotland, and when Winston Churchill was informed that they had the Deputy Fuhrer under arrest, he could not believe it. Back in Germany there was a huge problem, as Hitler ordered Goebbels to portray Hess as a madman who had lost his mind, as the Fuhrer was in no mood to negotiate at all, and Hess had done this behind his back, and Hitler then publicly stripped Hess of all his party ranks and titles. But he went further and ordered Rudolf Hess to be executed if he ever set foot in his Germany again, but Hess told the Duke of Hamilton that his landing was as he was on a mission to preserve humanity. He told him that Hitler wanted to end the hostilities with the British, But Hess's capture was announced to the nation, and there was a lot of confusion. He was processed as a prisoner of war, and was then held inside the Tower of London, the infamous fortress where Henry VIII's wives lost their heads, and where medieval torture was inflicted. Hess was of course not tortured, and was in fact treated very well, and was regarded as a gentleman by the beefeaters who guarded him at the Tower, and he was then transferred to a mansion in Surrey for his imprisonment. He was psychologically evaluated, and it was claimed he was mentally unstable, and was very erratic with his behaviour. On the 16th of June 1942, he even jumped over a railing of a staircase and broke his leg in an attempt to take his life, and he was then transferred to a different, stricter facility, where he was kept under a closer watch for 3 years. But in February 1945, Hess made another attempt on his life, and he stabbed himself with a bread knife repeatedly. But at the end of the Second World War and following the surrender of Nazi Germany, Rudolf Hess would be brought to the Nuremberg trials to stand accused of a number of charges relating to his time in the Nazi Party. He was accused of all 4 charges: conspiracy to commit crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes against peace, and war crimes. He was a man who to onlookers was not very well, and he seemed slightly insane to an everyday person, as he would have strange episodes during the trial, and some of his fellow defendants mocked him for this. It's possible he may have realised that this could have saved him from the hangman's noose, but he did have a defence which was very strong. Because he had flown and crash-landed in Scotland early in the war, this meant he was not in Germany and in the Nazi Party when policies such as the final solution were ramped up and imposed upon thousands of people. But he was found guilty of 2 counts and was spared the hangman's noose and was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. When held inside of Spandau Prison, Hess was kept under close watch by guards from different nations, and he was known as Prisoner Number 7, and was only given a small ration of paper to write letters with, and he was not allowed to converse with other prisoners without permission. He was expected to get involved in the chores, and was allowed to have walks inside the gardens, but as the years went on, rules became a lot easier, and Hess was visited by his family. He would throughout the nights cry and wail, and he accused guards of poisoning his meals and continued to try and end his life, but he would remain locked up inside of Spandau for the rest of his life. But one by one the other Nazis were released, but Hess would not be, and for him life meant life, and despite at the end being allowed to do whatever he wished, he died inside the prison walls. In September 1979, Rudolf Hess was suffering from prostate cancer, but he refused to apologise for his actions, and on the 17th of August 1987, he was found dead inside of a summer room in the prison's gardens. It was claimed that an extension cord had been tied over a window latch, and then this secured around his neck, and found in his pocket was a letter to his family thanking them for what they had done. There was a lot of debate surrounding Hess's death, but in 2019, DNA testing proved that Rudolf Hess was the man who died that day and had been buried, as many believed it could have been a body double. But following his death, Rudolf Hess was buried to begin with in what the authorities thought would be a secret location, but it did not take long for neo-Nazis to find Hess's grave. They then held rallies and gatherings around this. Because of the attention, the German authorities ordered the exhumation of Rudolf Hess's body, and he was dug up in the middle of the night by authorities and was then reinterred in Wunsiedel in Bavaria on the 17th of March 1988. This was less than a year after his death, and his wife 7 years later was buried with him on the family plot. But there were many more issues that continued regarding the grave of Rudolf Hess, as yet again it became a site of pilgrimage and worship for neo-Nazis, and every year on the anniversary of his death, groups would visit and hold huge demonstrations. It was pure chaos, and there needed to be something done with this, but the council stated that the permit regarding the lease of the grave would not be extended when it expired. In Hess's will, he dictated that he wanted to be buried in Wunsiedel, as it was where his family would spend many holidays, and was also where his parents were also buried. It was a local church who oversaw his reburial, and they declared that it would have been wrong to ignore the wishes of a dead man, regardless of who he was. But many Nazi symbols would decorate Hess's gravesite, and wreaths containing swastikas would be laid on his grave, and men were seen performing the Hitler salute around it. One member of the local council claimed the whole town was shut down and in turmoil, and there was a huge police presence, we at the graveyard were not able to cope. The authorities in the area then made the decision to yet again dig up the corpse of Rudolf Hess for one last time to solve the problem that came with his burial. Hess's granddaughter was not impressed with the exhumation as it went against his dying wishes, but the council ignored this and then had Hess exhumed. One resident of the area stated, "Perhaps we will now have some peace when he is gone. Perhaps they won't come any more." But under the cover of nightfall, the remains of Rudolf Hess were exhumed again from his grave quietly on the 20th of July 2011. The body was then taken to a nearby crematorium, and the body of Hess was cremated and was reduced to ashes. These were then given to his family members, and they were then scattered at the sea. The gravestone which outlined his name and had the inscription "I had dared" written on it was broken up, and any reference to the Deputy Fuhrer the former Deputy Fuhrer was removed from the graveyard. The council then confirmed that the grave had been emptied, and that the body had been cremated and removed, and the authorities were glad to see the back of Hess's body. But Rudolf Hess is still someone who troubles historians to this day, as there are so many questions that exist regarding his policies, his personality, and his death inside of Spandau Prison. His grave became a shrine following his initial burial, and he was dug up a number of times before his remains were finally dealt with to deter unwanted attention. But his exhumation was fueled by threats caused by dangerous sections of German society, and Hess was a man who could have been executed alongside the other Nazis who went to the gallows at the Nuremberg trials. But today nothing exists of the remains of the Deputy Fuhrer, and his grave is no more. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.